Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Inka Vat. Coming up, Donald Trump's words on China that everyone missed.
I think they probably would do something pretty harsh, and then they would be met harshly and bad things will happen.
What exactly does being met harshly mean? Also in the show, Ferdinand Marcos Jr. says Japan and the Philippines are entering a new phase ahead of his state visit next week, while NHK says Manila and Tokyo are mulling the transfer of air defense missiles. Meanwhile, China is angry that Marcos maintains the Philippines has no choice but to get involved in any Taiwan crisis due to proximity, as this means Taiwan's two neighbours in the first island chain now hold a similar position on any China attack.
It should be stressed that large number of Filipinos living and working on the island and geopolitical proximity should not be served as the excuse for one country to interfere in other countries' internal and sovereign affairs.
Plus, to deter such an attack, the US and Japan are holding 6 days of drills on islands closest to Taiwan, while China responds with aircraft carrier drills in the Western Pacific. And finally, in Taiwan, President Lai Ching-te marks his second anniversary halfway through his first term with the prospect of a potential phone call from the US president, a move unprecedented since 1979.
Do you have any plans to call President Lai of Taiwan before you make a decision on the weapons package?
I'll speak to him. I speak to everybody.
Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Inka Vat. To discuss this and more, I'm joined by Liu Dehai, National Zhengzhi University College of International Affairs Adjunct Distinguished Professor. And we also have from Geneva, James Fennell, retired US Navy captain and former Pacific Fleet Director of Intelligence and Information. And from Manila, Renato Cruz de Castro, De La Salle University, Department of International Studies, Distinguished Professor. A very warm welcome to all our guests today. But first, Fox News interviewed a retired Chinese colonel in Beijing during Donald Trump's visit. The ex-military official identifies two locations where conflict could occur.
Is China looking for a fight? No, the question actually should be thrown back to the United States. Are you looking for a fight in Taiwan Strait or not? Because there are two dangerous areas for us in which China and the U.S. could come into fight. One is South China Sea, the other is Taiwan Strait. In South China Sea, it might be triggered by a kind of unintended collision of aircraft or ships.
Then he delivers 2 points, ostensibly about the lessons China has learned from Iran.
Well, I think we have learned a number of things. First of all, your allies are not really helpful. Yeah, so having...
Our allies aren't helpful?
Your allies are not helpful. None of them would come to help you, right? So that means you have wasted your money over the past years and decades. Yeah, and so that is a good lesson for China, because Chinese policy is not to have an alliance, right? And besides, fighting far away, from your own shores, which is not justifiable politically.
And here's Marcos explaining, though the Philippines doesn't want war, it would be inevitably dragged in.
Just looking at the map, you can tell that the northern Philippines, at the very least, is going to be part of that or will feel the effects. Let me just put it that way. We will feel the effects up in northern Luzon. And probably the rest of Luzon, and we will feel the effects of that, whether we want to or not.
So, Jim, let's deal with the retired Chinese colonel's comments first. What do you think he was trying to say?
Well, Yin, it's very clear that Colonel Zhao's comments are classic Chinese Communist Party propaganda, information warfare, cognitive warfare, designed to influence an American audience, largely on the left, to say that America's in a bad position and to instill this idea of defeat. But what the colonel didn't say, or what he lied about, was very interesting. He talked about the Taiwan Strait and the South China Sea, but he didn't mention the PRC and the PLA's threats to Japan in the first island chain and the second island chain. He talked about that our allies weren't going to help us, yet we have help from the UK, Germany, France, Portugal have all given some form of support. So the comparison with NATO is very weak. He understands that America's alliance structure is very strong, not just in Europe, but also in the Asia-Pacific region, which we'll be discussing today. And I think the other thing he said was China policy is not to have alliances. Well, then what is the Shanghai Cooperation Organization? What is the military alliance that they have with Russia that was just kind of reinforced with President Putin's visit to Beijing and their 20-year military joint mission exercises that the PLA does with the Russian military? So a lot of falsehoods in the colonel's statements, but it reflects concern that they have that they're seeing a united alliance structure from Japan, Taiwan, and the Philippines, Australia. Nations in Asia are concerned with China's military activities, their modernization program for the last quarter of a century, and the activities and actions that they use that military to threaten their allies or threaten the region.
And Jim, how about the other point, which is, I think that he said the fighting is too far away from your shores. Public will find it politically unjustifiable. How does that transfer then across to Asia?
Well, we've sent aircraft carriers from San Diego, and they're operating right now in the Gulf of Oman, the USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group. That's more than the distance to the Western Pacific. So I think America has a global reach. We can reach from both of our coasts, the East Coast and West Coast. And the distance is something that I think he was keen on, a statement that President Trump made about 9,500 miles. And I think that was just a rhetorical flourish from the president. But they will use every tool in their cognitive warfare playbook to try to diminish our resolve and our in the trust that our allies have with America.
Renato, so the Colonel's comments directly contradict the reality of the security infrastructure that's being built in the Indo-Pacific. But should we see China's anger at Marcos's comments in this light?
That's the point. His propaganda spin simply doesn't conform with actual reality. Post-Second World War period has been characterized by forward deployment. American forces operating far from the coast of the United States, primarily because of American bases, and more significantly, because of the American alliance system. Countries in the region allow the United States to operate as forward deployed forces because they guarantee the security of countries like Japan, the Philippines, Australia, South Korea, and of course, even at this point in time, Taiwan.
The Colonel, he effectively mocked the US in that interview, but does it really just mask this paranoia that China has, essentially about the effectiveness of the first island chain architecture?
I think it masks China's envy of the United States. Two capabilities that China simply could not imagine possessing at this point in time. The Trump administration is strengthening the hubs and spoke system, especially along the first island chain.
Okay, let's go back to Ferdinand Marcos. He said that security will be a key topic when he visits Takaichi Sanae next week in Japan. Watch.
For Japan now, I suppose you could say it is imperative that that new posture of Japan, we have to define it now in terms, and this is what I will seek to clarify, is to define it in terms of how it's going to work for Japan and the Philippines bilaterally, and together, multilaterally, together with our other friends and allies in the region. We would like to hear more about what exactly does Japan intend to do and what they are willing to do.
So, Professor Liu, what do you expect the two leaders to talk about? South China Sea scenario, Taiwan Strait, or both?
Yes, I think Marcos Jr. Is very eager to visit Japan. Why is that so? Because he mentioned about Japan just lift the ban on exporting arms abroad. So this is present a premier chance for Filipinos to upgrade its military capabilities. Marcos' government just secured $569 million for the budget, defense budget. So in that case, he can purchase Japanese missiles, aircraft, and the radar and other military equipment in order to upgrade its military capabilities. In addition, I think he is also interested in Takaichi's phone call to the U.S. President Trump.
On the Air Force
Trump
One.
just visited Beijing, and immediately they had the phone conversation. So of course he's eager to know what happened, and how they can work together, continue to support the U.S. in this region.
Okay, and what sort of message do you think that sends? You know, the two of these, essentially Taiwan's neighbors in the first island chain, coming together, talking about security, talking about arms. What message does that send back to this Chinese colonel?
Of course, I think they all want to tell China nothing has changed. You know, Japan and the Philippines and United States are working together in this region. It's very likely to defend Taiwan if China really decided to use force against Taiwan. Of course, there like other countries like Australia, New Zealand, they might also, plus South Korea, they might also join this kind of operation.
Okay, so Renato, we've heard of the Abukuma-class destroyer transfer, and now NHK reports Tokyo is considering the Type 88 missile. It's got a range of 100 kilometers after interest shown by Manila. How useful would this anti-ship missile be for the Philippines?
The armed forces of the Philippines is primarily army-centric because, of course, its involvement in counterinsurgency. So at this point in time, at least what I see as a short-term or even up to medium-term development is to develop the ground forces anti-access area denial capabilities. That's why, of course, the Philippine Marines acquired the BrahMos missiles. The Philippines, of course, invited the U.S. Army to deploy the Typhoon, and, of course, the United States Marine Corps to deploy the Nemesis. And, of course, just in case, of course, you have Japan providing, of course, the acquisition of the Philippines of the Type 88 surface and anti-ship missile to deter China not only in the South China Sea, more importantly, of course, in the Luzon Strait, in case you have a Taiwan contingency. Those Type 88 missiles could be deployed in northern Luzon and possibly even in the Batanes Islands.
Okay, well, Trump's comments about not wanting to send U.S. troops 9,500 miles away to Taiwan were widely covered. He also said this, where they refers to Beijing. Listen.
They just don't want to see this place, we'll call it a place because nobody knows how to define it. I think they probably would do something pretty harsh, and then they would be met harshly and bad things will happen. We talked the whole night about that issue. I think I know more about Taiwan right now than I know about almost any country.
And multiple officials, including U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, have repeated that U.S. policy and Ronald Reagan's 6 assurances on Taiwan haven't changed. Meanwhile, Taiwan President Lai Ching-te marked his 2nd anniversary and the midway point of his first term with this speech.
台湾的未来不能由境外势力决定，也不能被恐惧、分裂或短期利益绑架。台湾的未来必须由2300万人民共同决定，维持台海和平稳定，阻止外力改变台海现状，是台湾的国家战略目标。台湾是国际社会上负责任的一员，不是破坏稳定的一方。
So, Professor Liu, going back to Donald Trump's words, they probably would do something pretty harsh, and then they would be met harshly, and bad things will happen. What does this mean?
I think U.S. have already learned quite a lot from Iran, so is actually Russia the same thing. If you think you are really big enough, and you bully the small one, sometimes you might not be able to benefit.
So you don't think it was a slip in that ambiguity from Donald Trump that he actually said China will be met harshly? Is that met harshly by the U.S.?
Of course, if U.S. Witness that kind of situation, U.S. will do something about it. At least Japan, both in Japan and Guam, U.S. has its military capabilities there, and bases there. Okay. Together, they can make a big difference. So in that case, that's kind of warning. To both sides try to warn each other not to do anything about Taiwan. So I think that's something U.S. said that nothing has changed. So it's up to China. If China take the peaceful way, yes, of course, that's no problem. If China take the harsh way, that means military forces against Taiwan. In that case, U.S. Will very likely to join the conflict.
Okay. In the opening, we played a clip of Trump on Wednesday repeating that he would speak to President Lai. Now, there hasn't been a phone call from a US president to a Taiwan president since 1979. So would a phone call, Renato, be only fair, given that Trump has discussed Taiwan arms sales with China, possibly also unprecedented since 1979?
Be fair, but again, it will be unprecedented. By calling President Lai, that's an implicit recognition of Taiwan as a sovereign country.
Exactly. I mean, be interesting what Beijing's reaction would be to that.
In a way, this is kind of a Solomonic scenario, in the Bible. So I will try to prevent Taiwan, I'll probably explain to Taiwan why I won't sell this amount of weapon. But on the other hand, he would have to talk directly to President Lai. And this will, of course, be an indication that the United States recognizes Taiwan as a sovereign state. He considers President Lai as a head of a sovereign government.
Okay. Jim, the FT, Financial Times, reports that, quote, Beijing is holding up a proposed visit by Elbridge Colby as China pressures Trump over a $14 billion weapons package for Taiwan. Now, we know that Colby is the U.S.'s defense policy chief. So what's going on there? Following Trump's negotiating chip comments, does China now think it can play the same game?
I think China just shot themselves in the foot with this one. I think this will go down like a lead balloon in Washington with the president. I mean, he thought he had some kind of deep conversation with President Xi about this situation, and then they come out and they start threatening his people. It's not going to influence him in the way that they, I think, expect him to do. So I would expect that they'll probably just say, fine, we're going to have the arms package and Colby will not go to China. He doesn't need to go to China, but we'll see. Go ahead.
Yeah, because, I mean, Elbridge Colby, we know, was the U.S. official that advised Taiwan to increase defense spending to 10% of GDP to buy U.S. arms to defend itself. So the idea of Beijing now trying to force Colby to go against his own policy.
Right. It's a stick in the eye to not just Colby, but to the president. And I think that's the real issue there is that, President Trump felt like he had some kind of connection there with Xi. And so if, as soon as President Trump left the region, the PLA starts surrounding Taiwan again with ships and aircraft, and then they do this kind of a statement. It looks like they're not very sincere about what they discussed.
Okay. Now, our final section on the Japanese islands closest to Taiwan. 300 elite Japanese ground forces and 20 U.S. Marines are holding 6 days of defensive exercises, drilling anti-ship capabilities and integration with U.S. forces. On Ishigaki, troops are deploying the Type 88 missile used in Balikatan for the first time. On Yonaguni, drone reconnaissance operations are taking place. On Miyako, they're establishing a bilateral Japan-U.S. command center. At the same time, China's Liaoning aircraft carrier kicked off training exercises in the Western Pacific, including live fire drills, though no exact location was given by China. Meanwhile, China has lashed out at Japan for hardening its southwestern islands to complicate PLA operations in any Taiwan crisis. Japan will deploy drones to fix a gap in surveillance along its Nansei Island chain. Here's the PLA Daily accusing Tokyo of taking, quote, a dangerous gamble and disputing Japan's description of its defense architecture as a shield, which, according to Beijing, is in reality a long spear. So bringing Jim back in from Geneva, as Taiwan Ambassador Alexander Yu said on Face the Nation, the intruder is complaining when you beef up your security system. So what exactly is the dangerous gamble that China's accusing Japan of?
Well, they're accusing Japan and the Philippines and Taiwan of defending themselves. And so it's not really a dangerous gamble. It's what you do. People lock their doors so they don't have robbers come in. And the people of the region are defending themselves against China. And, if you go back and listen to what the Chinese have said for the last couple of decades, their former Navy commander, Admiral Lu Waching, said, we have to break outside the first island chain in order to be able to, project China's power and to affect what they want to do, which is to take Taiwan and to take some of these islands in the East China Sea and the South China Sea. So they know that naval power breaking outside the first island chain is one of their military goals. And so when these nations like the US and Japan in this instance, or in Bala-Katan that we just discussed, are starting to defend themselves there with these surface-to-surface anti-ship cruise missiles, that's a threat to their military plans. And so they're naturally upset about it. We're anticipating that China's going to be landing forces on some of these islands. And so to defend yourself against that landing is not a provocative, that's a defensive nature. And it was announced in Global Times today that it was doing, as you mentioned, live fire exercises and also support and cover exercises. And they said in the article today, this would be much greater live fire exercises than ever before. So China's making it clear that they want to be able to project power to disrupt the U.S. Navy's ability and the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force to be able to come in and defend against Chinese invasion of either Taiwan or the Nansei Shoto, the lower Ryukyu Islands, or in the South China Sea. So it's all one big island chain, and China wants to break outside of it, and they want to use naval power to disrupt any U.S. intervention.
And Renato, despite all that training, China's military mouthpiece, PLA Daily, has issued what essentially is a rare warning that Chinese troops may be insufficiently trained to operate new weapons, including unmanned systems. Let me quote some of it for you. Without strong technical expertise, personnel simply cannot operate them effectively, let alone achieve coordinated manned-unmanned operations. Also, even advanced equipment may fail to deliver its operational advantages, reducing combat effectiveness and potentially leading to defeat in war. I mean, this is very uncharacteristic, isn't it, for the Chinese, for the PLA? Why are they issuing this warning publicly?
I think it's a very candid admission of the fact that despite billions of dollars being poured into the modernization of the People's Liberation Army and, of course, acquisition of equipment, the People's Liberation Army simply lacks one very essential element. That's combat experience. The last time, of course, China has used massive force was, of course, the way they tried to teach the Vietnamese a lesson, which, of course, they were the one who experienced a very traumatic lesson in 1979. Deep inside the mind of every Chinese general, admiral, is the fact that will my inexperienced troops be able to withstand actual combat and, of course, combat other modern situation?
Professor Liu, so this admission of a capability gap, as Renato explained, is this how should we read this? As a sort of urgent call to accelerate combat readiness? And if so, does that mean that China is serious about conflict?
Yeah, I think China, of course, is very serious of conflict. That is why China gave this kind of warning, because last time, I think at least twice, once is American Air Forces, the other one is Japan's jet fighter, approached the Chinese military drill field. So that is why they almost had this kind of dangerous situation. Japan complained, China, targeted at Japan. The vice versa, the United States also mentioned about this dangerous action. So that is why, because Chinese, they are very concerned about if US and Japan getting closer so they can collect sensitive military operation data from China's military operation. So in that case, of course, it's not good for China in case there is a military confrontation in the future.
Okay, bringing Jim in.
I think what we should be doing is our own form of cognitive warfare to help reinforce the doubts that they have and to introduce new doubts into their thinking so that they go back and have to reassess their planning timelines and their planning capabilities. And I think, as Renato said, what's happened in Iran is certainly making the Chinese Communist Party and the PLA have to reconsider many, many things as they watch us conduct sustained combat operations from a joint force as well as a naval blockade, something that could be inflicted upon China, oh, by the way.
Renato, something else that China may have to worry about. So US is about to announce a reduction of military assets in NATO's crisis pool. Is this the trade-off to effectively deter China's aggressions against the First Island chain?
I think that has been impressed upon by the Trump administration as early as last year. During the Munich Security Conference, I think it was Secretary Hegseth who said, Rich Colby said during the Munich Security Conference last year, we're starting to move assets away from the Euro-Atlantic in the Indo-Pacific, primarily because of the perception then, the view in Washington, that China, of course, is a greater threat than Russia. It is also a signaling and also a matter of contingency planning, that, of course, the Indo-Pacific might be the real flashpoint rather than, of course, the Euro-Atlantic. This is, of course, probably the assessment of Indo-PACOM and probably up to the Department of War.
Beijing at this moment try to use this bargaining chip to force U.S. to back off and focus on what's so-called stabilizing big power relationship.
Okay, we're going to have to wrap it up there. Thank you so much to our guests, Liu Dehai in the studio, Jim Fennell and Renato Cruz de Castro online. Thank you so much. If you liked our show, please search for us on YouTube, give us a thumbs up and hit subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching the show today. Stay safe and see you next time.